In rock and roll, my job is to make the groove and occasionally do something clever.
Before Ian Paice became the thunderous heartbeat behind Deep Purple's legendary sound, before tracks like Smoke on the Water and Highway Star redefined rock drumming forever, he was a young musician learning from the masters. The drumming style that would later influence countless rock and metal drummers didn't emerge in a vacuum. Instead, it was carefully crafted through the study of 5 remarkable drummers who came before him. These 5 influences represent different aspects of drumming excellence. From jazz virtuosos to rock pioneers, each contributed something unique to Paice's developing style. Together, they helped create one of rock's most distinctive and powerful drummers, whose playing would become as recognizable as any guitar riff or vocal melody in Deep Purple's catalog. The foundation, Buddy Rich. When Ian Paice talks about the foundations of his drumming, one name consistently emerges above all others: Buddy Rich. While Paice would eventually become known as a hard rock and heavy metal pioneer, his early musical education was deeply rooted in swing, big band, and jazz drumming. At the center of that world stood Buddy Rich, a drummer whose combination of speed, control, and explosive power left an lasting mark on musicians across all genres. For Paice, Rich represented something more than just technical ability. He was a reference point for what true excellence looked like behind a drum kit. Paice has always been clear that he never tried to simply copy Rich's style, recognizing that such imitation would be pointless. Instead, he drew inspiration from the creative fire, discipline, and musical intelligence that defined everything Rich did. What made Rich so appealing wasn't just his incredible technical skills, though those were certainly impressive. It was his unique ability to combine lightning-fast playing with musical phrasing, precision with personality. Rich brought a physicality to drumming that felt revolutionary without ever becoming chaotic or messy. His control, particularly when performing single-stroke rolls, became the gold standard that drummers still measure themselves against today. Paice often points to Rich's single-stroke rolls as masterclasses in efficiency and execution. They proved that brilliance in drumming wasn't always about playing the most complex patterns possible, but rather about having complete command of your instrument. Rich could make the simplest techniques sound extraordinary through his perfect execution and musical timing. Beyond the technical aspects, what truly resonated with Paice was Rich's ability to express genuine emotion and energy through rhythm. Rich was never content to simply keep time for other musicians. His drum solos were carefully structured musical statements, filled with crescendos that built tension and releases that provided satisfaction, all while remaining completely improvised. This approach demonstrated a deep understanding of musical storytelling, something that Paice would later adopt in his own performances. This influence becomes clearly audible in Deep Purple's legendary Made in Japan album, where Paice's solo on The Mule shows clear inspiration from jazz drumming approaches. Rather than relying on repetitive patterns, Paice builds and resolves his solos using evolving musical phrases, just as Rich had taught him through example. Another crucial aspect of Rich's influence was his role as a bandleader. While most drummers traditionally provided support from behind their kits, Rich fronted his own big band with an assertiveness rarely seen among percussionists. This example showed Paice that a drummer could serve as both a rhythmic foundation and a commanding musical presence. While Paice never aspired to front his own band, Rich's leadership style helped validate the idea that drummers could be central to a band's dynamic and identity. This certainly proved true in Deep Purple, where Paice's playing became as recognizable and important as the guitars or vocals. The connection between Rich and Paice extended beyond just musical influence. In 2023, Paice participated in a special event called A Groovy Christmas as a guest performer with the Buddy Rich Big Band. Performing alongside Emmy award-winning drummer Greg Potter and Rich's daughter Kathy Rich, Paice contributed to a night dedicated to preserving Buddy's musical legacy. For Paice, this wasn't just a tribute to his lifelong idol, but an affirmation of how timeless and relevant big band drumming remains. In an era when rock drummers increasingly rely on production tricks and digital perfection, Paice sees Buddy Rich as a reminder of what true mastery looks like in its purest form. No click tracks, no second takes, no studio overdubs. just hands, sticks, and a relentless drive to create music that moves people. The art of restraint. Ringo Starr, for Ian Paice, Ringo Starr's drumming represented something that many people initially overlooked: the power of musical restraint. In an era when flashy playing often overshadowed musical feeling, Ringo provided a masterclass in sensitivity and taste. Though Paice became known for his blistering speed and surgical precision on tracks like Fireball and The Mule, his musical choices were always governed by what would serve each song best. This foundational principle was something he learned directly from studying Ringo Starr. As Paice explained in various interviews, Ringo demonstrated that playing the right part wasn't about showing off with complicated fills or impressive technique. Instead, it was about developing feel, supporting the melody, anticipating vocal phrasing, and shaping the groove in ways that elevated the entire band without drawing attention to the drummer. This approach would become central to Paice's own method, particularly in Deep Purple's more intricate recordings, where he balanced heavy rhythmic responsibilities with nuance and musical space. Both Paice and Starr share an interesting technical similarity. They're both left-handed drummers. Starr famously played on a right-handed drum kit, which gave his playing a distinctive character. His fills moved in unconventional directions, and his grooves had a subtle swing that came from his natural handedness. Paice also plays left-handed, though he sets up his kit accordingly. He has long acknowledged how being left-handed helped drummers stand out in terms of phrasing and touch. When discussing Starr's influence, Paice frequently mentions this non-traditional movement around the drum kit, noting how it added personal flavor to even the simplest Beatles tracks. However, technique was only part of what impressed Paice about Ringo's playing. What truly stood out was Starr's musical discipline. In a band as inventive and harmonically complex as the Beatles, the temptation to overplay would have been easy to fall into. Starr never did. Whether laying down the groove on Come Together or providing the offbeat fills in Rain, he always prioritized what would make the ensemble sound coherent and powerful. Ringo's drumming also reflected a deep understanding of musical styles that spanned multiple genres. From rockabilly to blues, from Motown to psychedelia, Starr absorbed and blended these influences in ways that always served the Beatles' constant evolution. This adaptability became a model for Paice's own approach to playing with different artists and in different musical contexts. Another area where Ringo left his mark was in recording practices. He was one of the first drummers to treat the recording studio as an instrument itself, working closely with producer George Martin to craft specific drum sounds for each individual song. Paice, who participated in many studio innovations with Deep Purple during the 1970s, credits Ringo as being ahead of his time in this regard. As Paice noted in a drumming clinic, "You listen to Beatles records, every song has a different drum sound, because Ringo knew that no one size fits all when it comes to tone." This concept became central to Paice's own philosophy in the studio, especially on landmark albums like Machine Head and In Rock, where his drum sound was carefully adapted for maximum musical impact on each track. Interestingly, both drummers also found themselves working with similar musicians throughout their careers. Paice performed on Paul McCartney's Run Devil Run sessions alongside David Gilmour. Starr, of course, shared decades of history with McCartney and was connected socially with Deep Purple through George Harrison's extended musical circle. Though they were never bandmates, Paice and Starr operated in similar musical worlds where legacy and craftsmanship held real importance. This cultural closeness only strengthened Paice's respect for what Starr had contributed to drumming and popular music. Expanding the vocabulary. Joe Morello. For Ian Paice, mastering drums wasn't just about developing speed or power. It was about constantly expanding his rhythmic vocabulary and understanding how rhythm could work in more sophisticated ways. This is where Joe Morello, best known as the rhythmic architect behind the Dave Brubeck Quartet, played a crucial role in Paice's development. Morello opened Paice's ears to a world where odd time signatures and complex polyrhythms flowed effortlessly, and more does. Importantly, where groove never got lost despite technical complexity. Joe Morello's work, particularly on famous tracks like Take 5, revolutionized how drummers thought about time signatures. Operating primarily in 5/4 time and other non-standard meters, Morello demonstrated how rhythm could remain fluid, musical, and intuitive, even when the mathematics behind it were complex. For a young Paice, this was a revelation. Most rock drummers in the 1960s were content to stay within standard 4/4 time, anchoring blues-based patterns with power and repetition. But Morello's playing showed that a drummer could break those conventional rules and still make the music feel accessible and alive. One of the most important lessons Paice learned from Morello was about control and technique. Morello had exceptional stick technique, relying heavily on finger control rather than brute arm power. This approach allowed him to execute intricate phrasing, subtle ghost notes, and dynamic shifts with remarkable clarity. Paice, though naturally a more forceful player due to the demands of rock music, incorporated aspects of this control into his own approach. His snare work, even on aggressive tracks like Highway Star or Burn, maintains a crisp articulation that owes more to jazz drumming than to traditional metal or blues rock. Morello also helped expand Paice's understanding of how drums could function melodically within a band context. In jazz, and particularly in Morello's solos, the drums didn't just support the harmonic structure created by other instruments. They added commentary, responded to the band, interacted with soloists, and created tension and release dynamics within the rhythm section itself. This approach deeply resonated with Paice, especially during Deep Purple's extended live performances and jam sessions. On songs like Child in Time or live versions of The Mule, Paice used space, syncopation, and careful phrasing much like a jazz drummer would. Rather than simply providing thunderous power, he crafted drum solos that were genuinely expressive, building emotional arcs that complemented the music's development. Importantly, Morello demonstrated that innovation didn't require ego or showmanship. Despite being a genuine technical pioneer who pushed the boundaries of what was possible behind a drum kit, he always played with humility, consistently in service of the music rather than his own reputation. This philosophy resonated strongly with Paice, who has often remarked that drumming isn't about showing off personal abilities, but about doing whatever each song needs to be successful. Morello's ability to anchor the Dave Brubeck Quartet through daring harmonic structures and constantly shifting tempos while remaining completely relaxed and musical was a masterclass in discipline. For Paice, this became a guiding principle. Be as technically brilliant as you can, but never at the expense of the groove or the song's needs. Morello's influence extended beyond just performance into education, which created an interesting parallel with Paice's own later career. Morello was a renowned teacher whose instructional books on stick control and rhythmic development became essential reading for serious drummers worldwide. Paice, in turn, became a frequent clinician himself, sharing insights not just about rock drumming techniques, but about how to think musically about rhythm and drumming in general. In these educational clinics, he often credited drummers like Morello for teaching him the importance of listening carefully to the band, to the groove, and even to the silence between notes. The visual impact, Gene Krupa. There was a moment in Ian Paice's youth that changed everything. Watching a black and white film of a 1940s big band, he saw Gene Krupa playing drums, and the visual impact was both undeniable and transformative. It wasn't Krupa's technical abilities that initially drew young Paice in, but rather his incredible stage presence and the way he commanded attention behind the kit. Paice has often said that before he even wanted to become a drummer, he wanted to look like Gene Krupa while playing. That early fascination with witnessing mastery in motion ignited Paice's deep and lifelong connection to drumming. Despite having no formal musical training at the time, Paice developed an intuitive understanding of drums purely by watching and emulating Krupa's movements. Sitting on his family's sofa, using knitting needles as makeshift drumsticks against furniture, he absorbed musical concepts and notation through careful observation. This visual learning method was so effective that it felt like discovering a form of natural talent. As a teenager, Paice's dedication to emulating his hero led him to build a rudimentary drum setup using biscuit tins and cellophane tape. This creative approach to instrument building demonstrated how deeply Krupa's influence had affected his thinking about music and drumming. Gene Krupa was historically significant as the first true star drummer, fundamentally redefining what the role could be. Modern drumming publications describe Krupa as the founding father of modern drum set playing, and his famous drum solo on Sing, Sing, Sing transformed the drummer's role from mere accompanist to featured soloist. This revolutionary approach deeply resonated with Paice, who adopted that same philosophy of embracing both showmanship and musicality. Pace's own extended drum solo in The Mule, for instance, constructs a dynamic narrative that channels Krupa's legacy directly into a rock music context. Pace's left-handed playing style, which combines power with nuance, echoes Krupa's swing-rooted fluidity. Though Deep Purple became known for hard rock intensity, Paice learned from Krupa's example to avoid simply pounding every beat. Instead, his playing incorporates space, accents, and swing elements that represent a direct inheritance from Krupa's jazz tradition. Music critics consistently note Pace's ability to fuse precision with raw power, which reflects Krupa's example of combining technical excellence with emotional expression. Improvisation held significant appeal for both drummers. Rather than simply keeping time mechanically, Paice treats his solos like musical journeys that rise, build tension, and then resolve satisfyingly. This approach mirrors the improvisational structures that made Krupa's solos famous. Watching Krupa's performances helped Paice understand that drums could carry an emotional arc and tell a story, not just provide a rhythmic pulse for other instruments. Paice found inspiration not only in Krupa's sound, but in the freedom and spontaneity of his performances. In an era when many drummers followed predictable, formulaic patterns, Krupa played with abandon, flair, and a willingness to take risks. Paice learned early that drumming should be playful, expressive, and never simply about maintaining metronomic regularity. This spirit of spontaneity and risk-taking lives on in Paice's performances decades later. He consistently embraces unpredictability, varying his fills and accents to keep each performance unique and engaging, rather than simply reproducing recorded parts exactly. The connection between jazz and rock drumming links Krupa and Paice within a broader rhythmic tradition that spans multiple generations. Krupa revolutionized drum set technique by adding hi-hats, emphasizing bass drum prominence, and expanding sonic textures. Paice inherited and extended that lineage, with his dynamic use of cymbals, matched grip rolls, and bass pedal speed demonstrating how Krupa's innovations continued to echo forward into rock music. In Paice's understanding, Krupa embodied the full potential of what a drummer could become. Krupa's solos with Benny Goodman's band, his natural charisma, and the way he shifted audience attention onto rhythm itself showed that drummers could be genuine artists, not just skilled technicians keeping time. Paice credits this influence for shaping his lifelong views on the importance of feel, phrasing, and performance quality, rather than simply focusing on technical accuracy. This admiration persisted throughout Paice's entire career. In a 2024 interview, Paice reiterated the transformative effect of first seeing Krupa perform. "Before I wanted to be a drummer, I wanted to look like him." That initial fascination never faded, and even after 5 decades of professional drumming, Paice's connection to Krupa's energy and approach remains vivid and influential. The bridge to rock. Carmine Appice. As Ian Paice's musical tastes evolved and Deep Purple's sound grew louder, faster, and more aggressive, he needed influences that could bridge the gap between jazz sophistication and rock power. That bridge came in the form of Carmine Appice, known for his thunderous playing with Vanilla Fudge, Cactus, and later with Rod Stewart and Ozzy Osbourne. Appice represented a new kind of rock drummer who wasn't just powerful but sophisticated, successfully fusing jazz-influenced dexterity with heavy, backbeat-driven intensity. For Paice, Appice's emergence signaled a new direction for drumming in rock music, one where force and finesse could coexist naturally. Paice helped establish a completely new visual and auditory language for rock drummers that would influence the entire genre. One of Appice's most distinctive contributions was his revolutionary stage setup. He introduced the gong to rock drumming, along with dual china cymbals mounted on boom stands and a massive theatrical kit design that prioritized both sound and visual impact. This approach became a template that hard rock and metal drummers would follow for decades. Paice, along with contemporaries like John Bonham, Neil Peart, and Roger Taylor, adopted elements of this expanded setup, not just for aesthetic reasons, but for genuine musical utility. The increased range of cymbals and percussive textures allowed for greater variety in fills and more dramatic dynamic shifts, something Paice began incorporating more frequently as Deep Purple's sound continued evolving. Technically, Appice's playing had direct and measurable influences on Paice's development. Paice's use of bass drum triplets, particularly heard on Vanilla Fudge's cover of Ticket to Ride, became a significant point of discussion among drummers of that era. John Bonham famously acknowledged that he borrowed this technique directly from Paice, and Paice similarly adopted and reimagined this approach for his own purposes. While Paice never simply copied Paice's patterns note for note, he drew from Appice's ability to articulate low-end phrasing with both clarity and punch. This influence can be heard in Paice's quick-footed syncopation on tracks like Fireball and Rat Bat Blue. The revolutionary idea that the bass drum could serve as more than just a timekeeper, functioning instead as an expressive voice within the rhythm section, was something Paice helped pioneer, and Paice embraced this concept completely. Paice's role as an educator also made a lasting impact on Paice's development. Paice was among the first rock drummers to publish comprehensive instructional books aimed at bridging the gap between rock and jazz techniques. Paice acknowledged that his generation of drummers often lacked formal training, and resources like Appice's educational materials provided crucial entry points for understanding advanced rudiments, phrasing, and coordination within rock contexts. The instructional material was accessible to beginners, but sophisticated enough to challenge developing players, something that aligned perfectly with Paice's own evolution from instinctive teenage prodigy to calculated technical player. Paice was also drawn to Paice's career versatility and longevity. While many drummers from their era found comfortable niches and remained within them, Paice moved fluidly between different genres and contexts. He toured with Jeff Beck, co-wrote #1 hits with Rod Stewart, and performed successfully in blues rock power trios as well as glam-influenced arena shows. This adaptability mirrored Paice's own career journey. Despite being deeply rooted in Deep Purple's identity, Paice worked successfully with Paul McCartney, Gary Moore, and Whitesnake, among others. In Appice, he saw a model for maintaining long-term relevance without sacrificing personal identity or artistic integrity. Though Paice and Appice never played together in the same band, they crossed paths professionally and socially throughout their careers, and mutual respect has always existed between them. Their names are frequently mentioned together in discussions about foundational rock drumming, alongside contemporaries like Bonham, Keith Moon, and Carl Palmer. When Paice discusses drummers he's proud to have influenced, Paice consistently appears near the top of his list. The synthesis, creating a unique style. These 5 towering influences shaped Ian Paice into a drummer who could seamlessly merge swing with thunder, subtlety with speed, restraint with power. This unique fusion of influences came to Gay, their most clearly during Deep Purple's golden era, particularly on tracks like Highway Star, where Paice's drumming manages to be relentlessly driving yet refined, powerful yet never overwhelming the other instruments. His tom-tom patterns on this track mirror classical musical motifs. His bass drum work anchors the song's harmonic weight, and his snare hits dance perfectly between anticipation and punctuation. On Speed King, his syncopated groove, shaped by jazz influences and blues feeling, drives the music with urgent pulse and energy. On Lazy, one of Purple's most blues-influenced cuts, Paice moves fluidly between restraint and ferocity, making his drums feel like an extension of the guitar lines rather than mere accompaniment. Yet Paice's genius wasn't limited to technical execution. His remarkable endurance and consistency over 5 decades made him a reliable force throughout Deep Purple's many lineup changes and musical evolutions. He maintained perfect attendance until a minor stroke in 2016 forced him to miss just 2 performances. His first missed shows in nearly 50 years of professional playing. Even that health setback couldn't stop him permanently. Within a month, he was back on stage, demonstrating the resilience and dedication that earned him respect from both fans and fellow musicians. This discipline and reliability made him the preferred drummer for some of the biggest names in rock history, including collaborations with Whitesnake, Gary Moore, George Harrison, Paul McCartney, and even the Velvet Underground during their final recording sessions. In each of these collaborations, Paice adapted his style to serve the music without compromising his distinctive feel, demonstrating remarkable versatility. Technically, Paice's speed capabilities have often been underestimated or overlooked. While many associate pure speed with drummers like Dave Lombardo or Mike Portnoy, Paice, using just a single bass drum pedal, could reach incredible velocities during the 1970s, long before metal drummers adopted double bass drums as standard equipment. His drum solo routines during that era, particularly in live performances in Japan and Germany, stunned audiences with their combination of fluidity, speed, and musical coherence. More impressive than his speed was his control and musical intelligence. He could instantly bring tempos down, shift dynamics dramatically, and reintroduce complexity without ever disrupting the underlying groove. In later years, Paice moved away from emphasizing pure speed and placed greater emphasis on groove, feel, and tonal quality. He became an advocate for simplicity with clear purpose, developing wisdom about knowing when not to play. In interviews, Paice frequently emphasized that being an effective drummer wasn't about being the fastest or loudest player, but about listening carefully, supporting the music, and adapting to what each song needed. He embraced collaboration with younger generations, working with drummers like Chad Smith of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, who openly credits Paice as a major inspiration. At events like the Modern Drummer Festival, Paice shared stages with new generations of players, proving that even well into his 70s, his musical feel remained completely intact. What makes Paice especially notable is his consistent humility throughout his career. While other drummers pursued endorsement deals and side projects for personal brand building, Paice remained focused primarily on the music itself. His modest personality contrasts sharply with his authoritative playing style. He never tried to become a rock star in the traditional sense. He was content to be simply a drummer, and he found that was enough. Paice is sometimes overlooked in discussions about drumming's biggest names, perhaps because he never chased headlines or created scandals, but his influence on the instrument has been quietly monumental. The blast beat heard in Black Knight predated extreme metal techniques by more than a decade. His drum parts on Fireball laid essential groundwork for countless double bass.